Good morning and welcome to Counterpoints. We have an amazing show today, don't we?
Amazing show today, and perhaps more amazing Counterpoints content in the future. We've been teasing this for a while, but we're actually very, very close right now.
If enough people go to breakingpoints.com before the end of this hour, and there might even still be a discount, subscribe to the premium version of the show, then we will do a Friday show.
Make sure to subscribe to the premium version of the show. We might do it anyway.
You might as well subscribe.
It was almost like a threat.
Yes.
Well, today we're going to start, obviously, in Arizona. Huge news from the Supreme Court in Arizona yesterday on an abortion ruling, a 160-year-old abortion ruling that is now in effect in the state of Arizona. We'll break it all down. We're then going to talk about Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin's conversation with Tom Cotton during testimony in front of Congress yesterday, and some other big updates out of the Middle East.
CNN has a new investigation into the Flower Massacre. Looks very similar to the World Central Kitchen Massacre. Looks to be a deliberate assault on the distribution of aid for the purpose of what Lloyd Austin says is not happening. So we'll break that down.
People can also see Ecuador on the screen. Not every day that we have Ecuador on the Counterpoints rundown, but today we have
a wild one.
Good reason to talk about Ecuador and a really interesting guest.
Yes. You may remember Guillaume Long, former foreign minister from a previous show. He's now going to join us because Mexico yesterday released harrowing video of Ecuadorian police raiding the Mexican embassy in Ecuador, dragging out the leftist vice president who they've charged with corruption, and kicking off an international incident. And we'll talk about the U.S. response to the behavior of its U.S.-backed regime in Ecuador, which is quickly becoming, going from one of the safest countries in South America to be a U.S.-backed narco state.
So Marjorie Taylor Greene is on the precipice of moving to vacate the chair. She already, I guess, filed the motion, but when she pushes for a vote on it is anybody's guess. And one of the big reasons for that is actually a really admirable fight over Section 702 that Freedom Caucus-type Republicans and Justice Democrat-type members could come together on and try to get to some reform. It's a huge surveillance mechanism. We've talked about it many times, and most of you are probably familiar with it, but there's a lot going on. The Biden administration is backing a terrible reauthorization bill, essentially.
And that vote is today and tomorrow. So this is a 6-month fight over surveillance authorities that is coming down today. Donald Trump weighed in on Truth Social. We'll try to figure out what he was trying to say.
And Norfolk Southern announced that it will settle for $600 million with victims in East Palestine. So we'll bring some details, talk a little bit about that. And an NPR business reporter of 20-plus years penned an essay in the Free Press yesterday. It was super buzzy, kind of blowing the whistle on NPR, but I think Ryan and I will have a lot to talk about in that segment.
Yeah.
All right, let's start in Arizona. We can put a one up on the screen. This is a report from NBC News in which they point out this 160-year near-total abortion ban that's still on the books in the state was ruled enforceable by the Arizona Supreme Court yesterday. They call it a bombshell decision that adds to the state growing list of places where abortion care is effectively banned. Now, more from the article. This is an 1864 law. In the middle of the Civil War, before Arizona was a state, it made abortion a felony, punishable by 2 to 5 years in prison for anyone who performs an abortion or helps a woman obtain an abortion. Now, there's some back and forth in the courts after Roe, as happened in a lot of states. Arizona is similar to a lot of states in this respect. The Civil War era law, NBC writes, enacted a half a century before Arizona even gained statehood, was never repealed. So an appellate court ruled last year that it could remain on the books as long as it was, quote, harmonized with a 2022 law, leading to substantial confusion in Arizona regarding exactly when, during a pregnancy, abortion was outlawed. The other thing I think is worth noting in this case is that the Attorney General of Arizona has said that she's not going to enforce it, but local prosecutors can enforce the old law. So that's not entirely comforting to supporters of abortion in Arizona or even opponents of this move from the Supreme Court. The other thing that I want to point out that I haven't seen in a lot of media reports is the way the Arizona Supreme Court handled this. Basically, they said, we think a decision of this gravity should be left to the people of Arizona. Basically, that there's legislative supremacy over the court in this case. So it's not sort of like the Alabama sort of, what's the best way to put it, like Judeo-Christian theological decision about IVF, they're actually just saying that we think the people of Arizona, this is almost, I'm paraphrasing from the decision, the people of Arizona, the legislature of Arizona, their representatives should make a decision on this. And in fact, it looks like that's what's going to happen in Arizona later this year.
It's like, hey, the people of Arizona spoke in 1864, right. Before 50 years before Arizona was a thing, and there were probably, 15 settlers, who passed on and voted on that.
I like how you said before Arizona was a thing.
Yeah, I mean it was a thing. It was like part of Mexico, and it was home to a lot of indigenous populations still at the time. But yeah, 7 of them got together and wrote a law banning abortion, and so now. But yes, so before we get into Carrie Lake's response here, the stage was set by Arizona Republicans, and you correct me if I'm wrong, because you followed this closer, when they passed this 15-week abortion ban in 2022, before Roe v. Wade was overturned, and they put into that law a provision that said, if Roe v. Wade is ever overturned, then actually forget this 15-week ban. We're going for broke. The entire 1864 law goes into effect, and that's why the court was able to make this completely ridiculous ruling and go back to 1864, because they had re-upped it in 2022. And it's also why Carrie Lake kind of knew ahead of time that this was going to happen. So it's not as if she can say she was caught off guard here. Carrie Lake, of course, the Republican senatorial candidate in Arizona. So we can put up her reaction here to this ruling, which is saying that this would be a 3. This is her saying, I oppose today's ruling, and I am calling on Katie Hobbs and the state legislature to come up with an immediate common sense solution that Arizonans can support. What's odd about this reaction is that she was asked about this in 2022, and we can. This is in a presidential debate. This is not like a gotcha moment with somebody on a rope line. Here she is in a 2022 senatorial debate.
Cary, we'll start with you on this one. The new law banning abortion, the new law banning abortion in Arizona after 15 weeks. There's that law, and there's a territorial era law which bans all abortion, Zippo, over. Which law do you think should take effect?
My personal belief is that all life matters, all life counts, and all life is precious, and I don't believe in abortion. I think the older law is going to go into effect. That's what I believe will happen.
Okay, but you approve of that? At conception?
I believe life begins at conception.
Okay, what do we do about abortion pills? What do we do about?
I don't think abortion pills should be legal. That's
not in Arizona.
So there you have Carrie Lake saying, "Look, I suspect and I support the older law going into effect." Did she not? So what explains the change in 2 years? Is it the shellacking that Republicans took in the polls in 2022?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely it. I've sort of seen the pattern after Roe. And again, like Doug Ducey passed that law. He was the governor of Arizona. Right. Considered
he was on Twitter complaining about it.
He was on Twitter complaining about it. It's considered sort of moderate. And Doug Ducey said, this is not the outcome that I would have preferred. And actually a lot of Arizona Republicans, it reminded me in many ways to what happened in Alabama after the IVF ruling came down, where you had a sort of race among Republicans to get out that statement condemning the ruling and saying, it's not a workable solution. It's basically sounding similar to Democrats on some of those questions, but with the caveat that I'm really pro-life, but X, Y, and Z. So
it really is like condemning the panther eating your face, after you nominated the panther to the court and signed into law legislation that enabled the panther to then eat your face.
It does seem like there was something intentionally ambiguous about what happened with the 15-week ban versus, it does seem like that. But obviously, Doug Ducey said it's not the outcome that he would have preferred. Carrie Lake is now backpedaling. I saw a senior advisor to Carrie Lake talking to Steve Bannon yesterday saying, this is obviously Democrats have a huge electoral gift in the question of abortion. And so there has to be a way to talk about this and get that. puts the writing on the wall for where Carrie Lake is going to go going forward. Now, I think a lot of Arizona voters are going to be heading to the ballot box and making decisions based on economics, their pocketbooks in the fall. I think it's probably going to be a heavy border-related election. But man, in terms of mobilizing the base or demobilizing the base, not getting people excited to vote for example, Carrie Lake, brutal. That will matter on the margins.
So you think Carrie Lake going kind of wobbly on this from the right's perspective could kind of hurt her with some
I think
of her ground support? Or what do you mean by that?
I think it's the type of thing that makes kind of the opposite. It makes a suburban woman who's really upset with what they see as radical policies from the Democrats, from Joe Biden, from Gayho, all of those things, say, I just am not going to vote. I can't vote for Carrie Lake. I don't like the other guys, but I'm not going to vote for Carrie Lake, so I'm staying home.
Okay, yeah. Or they become single issue on that question.
Definitely that'll happen too.
And come out and say, look, we're not going to be governed by 7 settlers from 1864.
I also think this is such a this is just a particularly egregious flip-flop on such a high-profile issue for Carrie Lake, where she's on tape one way, and now that's one of those things that seeps into your public persona during an election like this. It's hard to get rid of that. Nobody likes to see that.
Yeah, the soundbite is not great for her, because she also tried to do a little play on like all lives matter.
Yeah.
Like she's too kind of web-brained, and I'm sure she regrets that. But at the same time, how do you not see that coming? Like if you're going to be a calculating politician, then be the calculating politician in 2022 also.
Yeah.
It's an ancient history. I guess the only thing you can say is that it was pre-Roe, and that she genuinely just did not grasp what a electoral albatross it would be. Although she seems to be in the minority on that. Most people who have been pushing this, you've been very open about this. That like this is our view, but it's not an electoral winner.
No.
So maybe she hasn't thought about it enough. Like maybe it's more of a surface issue for her. Because if you spend any time thinking about it, you're like, this is not going to work out electorally.
Yeah. No, and I heard Nancy Mace talking about that as a Trump surrogate actually on NPR yesterday. She did a pretty good interview with NPR, as much as I'm loath to congratulate Nancy Mace sometimes. But she talked about it as a survivor of rape. She said, I understand why there need to be exceptions, and I understand why this is terrifying to women, basically. And you can see that's just, it's very... They didn't expect to have to talk about this in that way. They didn't expect post-Roe. And I think that's the big mistake of both the pro-life movement and the Republican Party. There was just not adequate preparation for what would happen if Roe fell. People on the left too, it just seemed so unthinkable that this would actually happen. It was like the pipe dream of the pro-life movement. And it was the nightmare of the actual Republican Party, where people are sort of moderately against abortion, but mostly in favor of winning elections and gaining more and more power. So Carrie Lake to me is an example of somebody who was really riding high on the Trump wave, somebody who was super popular with Trump's base. Ultimately lost the election when a lot of people said Carrie Lake is going to win this thing. Like I've never seen anything like it before. She lost, but she was riding really high. And I think that bubble kind of popped.
Yeah, and so if we can put up A5, this is to Emily's point earlier, that the Attorney General has said, that she won't enforce this. A reminder of sometimes every vote does matter. 280 votes separated the Democrat and the Republican in the Attorney General's race. If you remember, that was one of the races that wasn't called for weeks and weeks and weeks. She won it, and now she's saying that she's not going to enforce this. Like you said, local prosecutors, still can do that. In the fall, it looks like Arizona is going to have a constitutional a referendum, basically. In every single state, including Montana, Kansas, Kentucky, abortion rights have triumphed at the ballot box. And so the ones that we're looking at this time are what? We got potentially in Florida,
Yep.
Arizona.
Florida, Maryland, New York. Looks like now definitely it's going to happen in Arizona. They have to collect 384,000 valid signatures by July 4th.
That should be quite doable now, thanks to the Supreme Court.
Probably could do it today.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes. So it looks like that constitutional amendment, as you said, Ryan, is going to be there. There are efforts underway also in Arkansas, Nevada, South Dakota, Montana, Missouri, Colorado. It's possible but unlikely, according to the AP's analysis, that it ends up on the ballot in Iowa, Maine, and Pennsylvania in the fall. But a lot of swing states in there, obviously Florida, Arizona, Nevada, maybe Missouri and Colorado, but states where this is going to be a huge issue. This is better for turnout for Democrats than Republicans. There's just no question about it at this point. So actually, in a way, by kicking this back to Arizona voters, what the Supreme Court did is give Arizona voters a chance to get rid of the 15-week Doug Ducey law.
Yeah, when I saw that ruling, I wanted to check, was this Democrats?
Yeah,
on the Supreme
seriously.
Court, or do they just really hate Carrie Lake? Like Carrie Lake must be thinking to herself, "What have I done to this Arizona Supreme Court?
I think there was
to treat me this way."
Yeah. Well, this also happened the day after Donald Trump sort of, Crystal Sager talked about this, but had a little bit of an earthquake or induced a little bit of an earthquake in Republican politics with his statement on abortion. His statement on abortion was one that basically only Donald Trump can get away with. It's sort of a blueprint for other Republicans, and that's where you see Carrie Lake, her senior advisors, Nancy Mace, all kind of clustering in that region, which is basically saying things like, look, we think the voters should decide. The voters are wildly against the Democratic position, which is to not ban third trimester abortions. We all basically agree that somewhere, meeting in that second trimester is the way to regulate abortion. We don't agree with completely cutting off access. There have to be exceptions, and it is an electoral disaster. Blah, blah, blah. That's sort of like taking from Trump, adapting it to different candidates. But I don't know how it works if you're not Donald Trump in particular. It's like when he went off on Hillary Clinton in that one debate. You remember where he was like, she wants to rip babies out of wombs. But then at the same time, he also believes like pro-life Mike Pence type people are kind of crazy. And everybody knows it, frankly. Yeah. Like everybody knows it. So
he's creeped out by them.
Yes, yeah.
But he also every time during his presidency when he was in trouble, that's who he would go back to.
The pro-life community.
Yeah, because they were his most ardent supporters, and he knew it and they knew it.
They know it and really resent it. That's part of the reason that people were really upset yesterday on Mondays. They feel like they've really been taken for granted by Donald Trump, that he'll go to them when he needs that kind of bolstering. But then
nobody can be happy in America. Even the like anti-abortion crowd that got Roe v. Wade overturned by Trump. I think you got to cut the guy some slack. He delivered to the right the thing that they've been gunning for 50 years.
You sound like Nancy Mace.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, from their perspective, it's like, come on, what do you want from this guy? He obviously is personally
pro-choice,
completely opposed to everything you guys believe in, like culturally. But he's doing it anyway, just cynically.
Yeah.
So just ride that.
No, I agree with that position completely.
And although it's going to get ridden right into the ground, right? Like the effect that this is having on Republicans, it's interesting to think what kind of Republican Party you'd have if the Supreme Court just decided not to do that. Mm-hmm. You'd have probably 10, 20 extra Republicans in the House. They probably control the Senate right now and maybe control the Senate for the next 50 years.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that's an interesting question because I feel like the benefits have been pretty marginal to people like Alyssa Slotkin. And like, there are just some races where you're like, okay, clearly women were super motivated. The pattern of turnout looks like it was here. But I think a lot of Republicans have had this interesting position of like, this needs to, hardcore, like anti-abortion people like myself have said like, you're not going to solve this problem. Rod Dreher had a good post on this yesterday. You're not going to solve this problem at the ballot box at this point. All you're going to do is have catastrophic losses on every other policy issue. If you force an issue at the ballot box, that's going to lose time and again because the culture is not anywhere near the anti-abortion movement's position on it. So like, what's the wisdom? But on that side, you get immense pressure from people in the pro-life movement who are against this incrementalism, as they call it. And so that's, I mean, it's a smaller and smaller wing as time goes by, but like people in the anti-abortion movement actually are facing pressure from their right, even like hardcore people from their right. That is like, and again, it's understandable if you believe that ending a life after conception is murder. It's understandable why people would be against the incrementalism, but politics of the possible, I mean, it's just, there's really no path.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but they often would make parallels to the abolition or the anti-slavery
100%.
movement.
Absolutely.
Which was a fundamental misreading of everything. But like it had the same moral force to those particular people who were involved in it. But what they didn't understand is that there is a day after you overturn Roe.
Yes.
And so if you've got this guerrilla, which is different than the Civil War and emancipation, now we don't need to go into Reconstruction and Jim Crow and all of that, but there's a day after Roe, and so they run this guerrilla campaign to take a minority position and make it the law for the majority by taking over the courts. But then in the decision, they kind of didn't have the guts to go all the way. Like Alito in the decision says the Constitution is silent on the question of abortion, and therefore it needs to go back to
the states.
Yeah. And it could even go to Congress. So now you recognize that you're a minority position, and you had to run a guerrilla campaign to ban it. Now you've thrown it up to the public.
Yeah.
For them to vote on.
And the public's not with you.
And so now you got Roger like, oh, maybe voting isn't the way to do this. Let's go back to the courts. Well, you just did. What else is there? I guess there's he's saying wage a cultural war and persuade people.
Exactly.
But okay, good luck with that.
Yeah, but that's really the only route. I mean, that's the only way to do it. And it's not a, it's definitely not a one that's looking great. But Sagar pointed this out yesterday on Twitter. Basically, he was like, listen, the message of the pro-life movement my entire life was, let's kick it back to the states. And and now they're saying exactly the opposite of that, to the point you just made.
Not like that.
But what I think is interesting about that is, yes, the Republican Party said that. The pro-life movement itself as a whole has—
They just want to ban it.
In
the Constitution.
Again, there are a lot of students of, like deep students of John Brown and the abolitionist movement in the pro-life movement, and that take that comparison really seriously, do see it as a civil rights issue. And in that case, incrementalism to a lot of people looks ridiculous. Again, there's just plenty of people in the Republican Party who are not logically, intellectually consistent in their positions on abortion. And I feel like that, I'm very curious about Carrie Lake, who spent most of her life as a Democrat. I'm very curious as to if she ever thought some of that stuff through, because from Republican politicians, a lot of the pro-life talking points are cynical, and they're necessary in primaries. And then when push comes to shove, it's like, well, do I really? Usually not, because there are electoral consequences that don't jive with the logically consistent position.
Right, and basically, if you're trying to enforce minority position on a country that still has some democratic mechanisms in place, you can't do it.
It's not gonna work.
You either have to have dictatorial power, or, like you said, you have to have a cultural revolution where everybody where you win over a majority, you persuade a majority of people to agree with you. But the polling and our global experience suggests I think that's not going to happen. But I would love to see them try that. I think to me that is the appropriate way to do it. Go try to persuade people rather than having the court come down and tell people what to do.
Hey, if you liked that video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Breaking Points.
If you want to see the rest of Counterpoints, go to breakingpoints.com to become a premium member and get the full uncut show every morning in your inbox and on Spotify.
Help us build independent news and get the full show every morning at breakingpoints.com.